29:30 past the hour. Joining us now, Harvard law professor and potential 2016 presidential candidate, Lawrence Lessig. Really, you might jump in to make a point, right?
To make a point that's pretty familiar on this show, that this system is rigged, that, you guys pulled the curtain back with Donald Trump explaining exactly how money does everything in politics and drives politicians to do everything. But, it was 20 years ago that a young congressman, Joe Scarborough, you've heard of that guy?
Yeah, I think I know. Yeah,
explains, across the board, quote, money changed votes, explaining his experience in Congress. So this is a problem everybody gets. We get that every issue is tied to this issue. You're not going to get sane limits on guns until you fix this issue. You're not going to get climate change until you deal with this issue. You're going to get nothing done that the Democrats are talking about until we deal with this issue. So what I'm talking about is, how do we actually have a way to deal with this issue? Like, what is the plan? We can rage and fury about this, but what could we do? How could we fix it? And that's what I've tried to say.
I would think there would be one candidate, sorry, Nicole, one candidate that you perhaps find more attractive than the others, and that would be Bernie Sanders?
Right, but Bernie, he's checking off the right boxes. He's saying the right things. But the question is, will he have a mandate if he doesn't make this the issue he promises to deal with first? We have to, unless you say you're going to fix this first, everything else is not credible. You can say you're going to take on Wall Street.
How do you fix it?
Well, so what I've said I would do is I would run a campaign on one issue, this issue of fixing this corrupted system that we know is making it impossible for anything else to get done. And that would produce a mandate. It would be just this mandate on this one issue. And I would serve only as long as it took to pass this fundamental reform that we've described on our website that would fix this one issue, and then I would step aside.
But how would you change? This is now governed by the Supreme Court decision, Citizens United. So how would you pass a law that would pass muster concerning the Supreme Court?
So what the Supreme Court has said is you can't limit. The reforms that are now being pushed are not about limiting, they're about increasing, spreading out the funders so that it's not the 400 families, as the New York Times reported, that's giving half the money inside of the elections. It's instead spread out through small dollar, bottom-up funding. So, for example, I support vouchers, giving every voter a voucher. This is actually a Republican idea. Give every voter a voucher, and they give those vouchers to candidates who agree to fund their campaigns with small dollars only, small dollars and small contributions. This would radically change the way that candidates raise money. And this change is perfectly constitutional under the Supreme Court's jurisprudence. So we could have in this mandate, which is a stronger mandate than any of these other candidates could have, because when they come to office, they've promised 10 things, and the mandate's divided among 10 things. We could have a mandate that has a chance to stand up to the most powerful influence against this kind of reform.
One of the ideas we've heard many times on this set over the years is to have no limits on campaign money, but make it completely transparent so you know exactly on a website who's giving to whom and how much. What do you make of that idea?
Yeah, so instead of having 400 families, we would have 40 families, right? Because the natural trend, as you remove limits, is to increase the size of the contribution.
Right.
So great, we would know the 40 families. We already know the 40 families, right? The problem isn't that we're confused about whether big money is controlling politics. The problem is big money is controlling politics. And we have to give people a sense, a reason to believe that their government is responsive to them. Right now at the front of the line are the 400 families funding these campaigns. Those are the people at the front. They get their calls answered. You had Joe get the Donald Trump to explain this perfectly. I don't have to say any of that, right? But this change that I'm talking about would make it so they're just one of in the line. Like everybody has the influence because we've spread out the funder influence to everybody. This is a corruption we've got to find a way to change.
Michael Steele has a question for you. Michael?
Hey, Professor, I appreciate the idea, but part of what I think is missing in your analysis here is that the problem, in my estimation, having seen it from the inside, is not so much the 400 families who can write a big check, certainly in the heyday of Citizens United. It's really the process after you get elected. It is the K Street influence on the policy. I mean, because you're talking about a point in time with an election. Once the election is over, the governing is where things really get screwed up, because that's where the money has its greatest influence. So how do you propose addressing that? Because you know, the election is one thing. After you're done, it's the next 2 years or 4 years where the problem lies.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And as Jim Cooper congressman from Tennessee puts it. The problem with Capitol Hill is that Capitol Hill has become a kind of farm league for K Street. Members and staffers and bureaucrats have increasingly their business model focused on how they become lobbyists. But look, why are the lobbyists so powerful? It's because they are one of the channels through which money gets into the system. And congressmen have to return their favors if they're going to be able to get the money into the system. But if you change the way we fund campaigns, lobbyists don't disappear. They shouldn't disappear. They're important. They're important to explain to the government what's happening. But if you change the way you fund campaigns, they don't begin to have the power that they have anymore. Because, you know, as John Edwards used to say when we used to quote John Edwards, there's all the difference in the world between a lawyer making an argument to a jury and a lawyer handing out $100 bills to the jurors. But our lobbying system doesn't understand that difference. Those guys are handing out the $100 bills as they make their argument.
Mark Halpern has a question for you. Mark.
Professor Lessig, I appreciate your passion for this issue. I'm wondering whether you think Hillary Clinton, who's made campaign finance reform and some of the issues you're talking about, one of her big four of what she says she's running on, has the moral authority and the intellectual power and the commitment to be the one who can actually carry out the kind of changes you want?
Certainly not yet. Nowhere close. I mean, what she's talking about in her 4 pillars, first of all, is an amendment to the Constitution. Well, look, it takes 2/3 of Congress to propose an amendment and 3/4 of the states to pass it. Now, you know, people are calling me crazy, but who in this picture is crazy? Me or someone who's talking about getting 2/3 of Congress to propose such an amendment?
Well, let's think about this. Yeah, I think it might be the person proposing that.
So,
Lauren, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you quickly. You said if elected, you'd have a short run until you get all these passed, and you turn it over to your vice president.
Right.
Who is the ideal vice president who carries these ideas?
Well, you know, I have a list. It's my preferences, but ultimately it's the Democratic Convention that would do it. But in my view, it should be somebody who rallies the Democratic base. And the sort of people who are doing that really powerfully and effectively now are people like Bernie, people like my senator, Elizabeth Warren, people who get the base excited enough to turn up and vote. Because that's the ultimate question. How do we win to create the mandate to be able to stand up to this money influence finally and have a chance of winning?
And not Hillary Clinton?
Not yet. You know, I think it's early for her. She's just begun to describe this, and she's got a lot to explain. You know, she comes from a different era.
I mean, she has a record to speak for, so not yet? What do you mean?
No. I mean, not yet has she described how would she create the confidence. She hasn't created the confidence yet. I wrote a piece about, you know, we're nowhere close. But let her say, what would she do? I would love for her to say, here are the actual 6 things that would give us a reason to believe we could win. Now, I ultimately have come to my view, this is why I'm running, that none of them could win on this issue. None of them could win on this issue. They could never have a mandate powerful enough in this partisan environment to win on this issue, which is why we need to do something different. We need to try something that has a different optic to it so that nobody could doubt. Now, I'm running in the Democratic primary. What I hope is that somebody in the Republican primary does the same thing. In fact, I was hoping Joe was here. I was going to try to recruit Joe.
We could ask him to. We'll ask him.
Joe should do the same thing in the Republican primary so that we could have both candidates talking about this fundamental reform, and then we'd focus on the vice president.
Well, that would be really interesting. Lawrence Lessig, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. Fascinating discussion.